Hello, today I will present you a critical perspective on censorship in EFL materials. Do we really need it? Our behaviors and perceptions are not solely moderated by reasoning and rational thinking. The societal and cultural norms have an influential role in governing our actions and our understanding of the world around us. These norms may be culture-specific and vary from culture to culture, thus creating the term taboo. These norms may be culture-specific and vary from culture to culture, and thus creating the term taboo. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, taboo is the prohibition of an action based on the belief that such behavior is either too sacred and consecrated or too dangerous and accursed for ordinary individuals to undertake. Hence, an ordinary action or content for one society may be restricted to another culture. Muslims and Jewish people do not consume pork, and Hindus never eat beef due to religious restrictions. Inclusion of cultural topics in language learning materials requires intensive scrutiny. Most language teaching materials are designed with utmost care by considering taboo topics in order not to psychologically offend learners from different cultures. One of these taboo topics is pork, which is a sensitive content for Muslim and Jewish learners of English. ELT, English language teaching instructors with Muslim and Jewish audience or publishers pursuing global acceptance avoid the inclusion of these taboo topics such as pig-related figures, visuals, or even words, sausage, pork, boar, sow, in their course materials and instructional content, thus diverting learners to learn them from out-of-class contexts. Rather than relying solely on subjective data, this study adopted a process-oriented biometric approach to reveal learners' emotional reactions while they processed pork content in a multimodal learning environment, and also aimed to reveal any possible effect of pork content on learning gains. Additionally, facial expression analysis as a biometric interdisciplinary technique was introduced for language learning and teaching research. Answers for the following research questions were sought. What are the attitudes of Muslim learners towards pork? How did Muslim EFL learners react to pork content in a multimodal learning environment? Were their facial expressions in line with their attitudes towards pork content? Did pork content affect vocabulary learning gains? And the method, this study had a between subject design with two conditions, a pork and a lamb meat condition, in which a group of learners watched pork content, experimental group, and another group watched lamb content, control group. Control group and experimental group actually watched the same video including pork, but the control group was told that they will watch a recipe video involving lamb meat. 40 learners of EFL, English as a foreign language, 20 males and 20 females from a university in Turkey in an age range of 19 to 23 voluntarily participated in this study and received course credit for their participation. The first instrument is pork taboo survey. To determine participants' attitudes towards pork meat and ensure their unfamiliarity with pork, a 5-question survey was designed to investigate whether the participants had ever seen a pig or pork in real life, whether they had ever eaten pork meat or had any plan to eat it. Learners were also asked to state why they didn't choose to eat pork. In the final question, learners were asked to match pork with an emotional expression, including joy, sadness, surprise, disgust, anger, contempt, and fear, or select no emotion option. Disgust scale was the second instrument. Disgust scale was a simple verbal data collection instrument in which learners were required to rate the dish they watched from 1 to 10 after watching the recipe video. The visual stimulus used was an 3.20-minute cooking video with high resolution, which described step-by-step how to cook pork carnitas, a special dish in Mexican cuisine. 12 subtitle areas were produced and they were kept simple, comprising short and simple imperatives such as put, cut, add, and were 3 to 6 words in length. The final word for each subtitle was substituted with a 5-letter non-word generated from ARC non-word database. Each subtitle lasted about 10 seconds. An example is cut the meat with a knife, cut the meat with a creak. Creak was a non-word. And finally, the unannounced post-test. It consisted of 36 items and 3 main sections. Each item was scored as 1 point. And the devices that I have used was to collect the facial expression data, faced software my eye motions with an HD Logitech webcam was used. This biometric platform automatically detects face in front of the computer with a high quality HD webcam and acquires facial responses through a dedicated algorithm depending on the facial action coding system with 19 action units. The software can register up to 30 frames per second for 7 emotions and 3 valences. So the first result, the attitude towards pork visuals. 70% of the participants never saw a pig in real life. The remaining 30% had seen one at the zoo or in mountain villages. However, they probably saw wild boars. None of the learners had ever seen pork meat or tasted it. Furthermore, 90% of the participants reported that they would not eat pork or related foods under any circumstances, and 10% were curious about it and stated they might eat it if they had to. Students were also asked why they didn't eat pork meat within the scope of 3 main themes: religion, health, and appearance, regarding the order of importance of their own preferences. The most important theme was religion. 80% of the participants put it in the first place. They reported that they didn't eat pork as it was haram and forbidden by Islam. So here the second finding is the analysis of the facial reactions. So we're not focusing on all of the emotions, joy, anger, surprise, and fear, contempt, but we are mostly focusing on the negative valence here and the disgust here. So in this case, you see that this white line is the pork group, and the stripe one was lamb group. So you see that disgust is much higher in the pork group, and it's very slight in the lamb group. Indeed, we had no vegetarian participants, but somehow they might even a little bit disgusted the lamb meat because they may not love the meat, just any meal or any dish made by meat. So when we take a look at the valence here, you see that the negative valence for the pork content is much higher than the negative valence for the lamb content. So in this case, we can say that the Muslim learners have disgusted the pork content, as you see here and you see in the negative valence. So these values were found to have been significant in the research. And the last result was the post-test score. So we know that learners, the Muslim learners, language learners, disgusted the pork visuals and pork video. But how did it affect their post-test and vocabulary learning games? In this case, in the post-test, we had 3 components here: a stimulated recall, a closed test, writing words. So they're all about the memorization and the recall of the learned vocabulary items. So in this case, in none of these components, I couldn't find any significance. So there are no significance between the pork and lamb group, considering all of them. And mean scores were very similar to each other. And in this case, we can say that although the Muslim learners have discussed the pork content and showed negative valence towards them more than the lamb meat content, this disgust, emotion, intensity did not affect their language learning gains. This study explored how taboos might affect learner psychology and language learning processes by blending learner opinions, recall tests, and facial expression analysis. The results showed that Muslim learners were sensitive towards the pork taboo and felt disgusted while processing pork content. One clear conclusion is that Muslim EFL learners not only kept their distance to the pork taboo, but they also showed negative facial expressions. This conclusion is remarkable since it supports the recent cultural roadmap of some ELT publishers who recently excluded pork content in their textbooks for Muslim learners and Muslim regions. And secondarily, the results also provide an insight for language pedagogy in Islamic regions, postulating that inclusion of pork content in language instruction is more likely to cause discomfort among Muslim learners. The level of reactions may fluctuate depending on the depth of Islamic mentality, Thus, Western instructors in such regions should handle pork with care. Another conclusion to draw from this study is that taboos cause emotional reactions, which have no adverse effect on learned cognition. Hence, taboos can be criticized as being psychologically offensive for language learners. However, the current results show no negative impact on language learning gains and academic performance. It should be noted that the exclusion of pork topic in language learning contradicts critical pedagogy by Freire and Giraud, a term that emphasizes going beyond arbitrary social constraints in language classrooms and pursuing social transformation through education. Censoring pork content in education setting will surely divert learners to learn pork-related vocabulary from informal contexts, and thus the target culture instruction will be incomplete. And thank you very much for listening to me.